Do you think that Donald Trump would think that Nixon was kind of a wimp for resigning, that he should have just
Yes,
hung in
he
there?
all
You
but
do.
said that. All but said that he liked Nixon. It's remarkable how blatant the cover-up is. They don't know shame. They are shameless. You can't embarrass Donald Trump. You can't embarrass any of them. Trump has said publicly that he doesn't understand why Nixon resigned. They will be in things like the Tea Party that raise hell and don't follow norms and attack a black man who becomes president in the most vicious of ways. I called it long before it became so prevalent as it is today. I mean, these are descriptions of the people who are running the country today.
Welcome to another edition of SOS America. I'm Charles Feldman. Thank you very much for continuing to watch or listen to this podcast. We've been doing it now for several months. And as those of you who have been watching know, but I guess for those of you who haven't been watching and maybe are finding us for the first time, the purpose of this particular podcast and why it's called SOS America is to try to explain to people in this country, but also people who are living outside of the United States, what exactly is going on here? Because we are clearly, when I say we, the country, is clearly at some sort of an inflection point. What that point is, I think we're kind of slowly unraveling that as we go from episode to episode. I can't guarantee that we will come up with any definitive answer or conclusion, but we're going to try our best to do as much as we can to get as close as we can to answering that fundamental question. That having been said, there are many people that we have talked to and will talk to who can talk about historical things, can talk about the history of the United States, the history of the presidency, that sort of thing. There are very few people who are actually part of American history. Very few, really. My guest today is one such person. John Dean is very much a part of American history. He was the White House Counsel for Richard Nixon when Nixon, of course, was president of the United States. You may recognize, if you're either old enough or have actually looked through some history books, or maybe people don't do books anymore, so I don't know, history tweets. You will know that John Dean was, of course, associated with the whole Watergate incident in American history. In the past few years, he has done I think, very admirable service as a political analyst for many different news organizations. He's written a number of books, and too many for me to remember, so I'm going to let John say what they are as we go on in this conversation. So I really welcome to this particular podcast, John Dean. John, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure, Charles. It's nice to see you when I broadcast with you. It's normally over the telephone. For decades, it was over the telephone to a radio audience. So it's nice to visit.
Yes, thank you. It's always good to see somebody. So let me start off by, and I don't want to dwell too much on the Nixon years, but I will only for this particular.
They're fast becoming irrelevant.
Well, and that's kind of the point I want to see if we can talk about. Up until Donald Trump, the big, quote, American political scandal was Richard Nixon. I lived through that. You certainly lived through that. You were involved in that.
I blew the whistle on him.
You blew the whistle on that. And I remember watching you on television in the days when there were only 3 television networks.
Much younger edition. 50 years does make its mark.
Hey, we were both much younger than John, but you're looking good. But the where I'm going with this is that was, when you went through the history books since that time, the 70s, that was always kind of the political scandal of the 20th century in American politics was the Nixon White House.
Can I
And
footnote that?
yeah,
It was the standard below which no president wanted to get, to be accused of Nixonian behavior. Uh, and there were a whole set of norms that were set post Watergate, and you just didn't violate those until Donald Trump arrived. But that's
and
later in the story.
well, but that's the question I'm going to ask to start off our conversation. So you have Richard Nixon, and as you put it, and I think quite eloquently, the sort of the floor below which no one ever in the White House wanted to go. And now you have Donald Trump, who is in not his first, but his second term. In his mind, I guess it's his third, but his second time in the White House. Uh, has that floor now reached the sub basement?
Donald Trump is Richard Nixon on steroids and stilts, as far as behavior. They're very different men. They have some common traits, but they have more distinguishing traits. So, and I'm sure we'll get into that as we move along. But is the Watergate standard even relevant today? No. One day of Trump is a scandal that ran 900 days for Richard Nixon, although he did get reelected with a overwhelming mandate because the public really wasn't paying attention. But the mechanics of scandal are similar sometimes, and we don't know how this is all going to play out yet. The biggest difference, Charles, is the Republican Party has gone over the hill to support the lowest of Nixonian behavior, which did not happen during Watergate. Nixon, really had to leave office because he'd lost his support. The Republicans said this is enough, and it was particularly his lying that got him in trouble. And today, to think that a Nixon lie would result in a president resigning is just not even conceivable. We get lies every day now. They're the standard of behavior. You cannot. You have to double check everything he says, and then find out he puts lies on lies. So it's a very different time than it was during Watergate.
I did not know Richard Nixon. I certainly protested him when he was in the White House, but I didn't know him. I did know President Trump years ago anyway, so I have some feel of what the man is, or maybe was. But I'm wondering, what do you think Richard Nixon, if he were alive today, would think of Donald Trump?
I think he'd be very upset with Donald Trump. Nixon actually was an establishmentarian. He believed in institutions. He had been vice president. Well, first of all, he'd been in the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. And, while he was a critic of Congress, when he got in the executive branch, he understood how it worked and what its role was. And once he became vice president, he actually served for a short while during Eisenhower's presidency as the acting president. So he had held all those positions before he was elected to president. And as a two-term president, he didn't finish the second term, but he understood the institution and he admired the institution. And he actually occasionally since he was privately recorded or secretly recorded, sometimes on those tapes, he makes statements that are let's protect the presidency. Don't do something to weaken the presidency. These are thoughts that Trump has never even conceived, that you would want to protect these institutions. And I think that the authoritarianism that was always in Nixon just got unleashed in a way we could have never anticipated with Trump. As we were discussing before we went on the air, just in the last couple of years, I've done 2 books on authoritarianism. I did the first one without even mentioning Watergate or the Nixon White House or much to do with that at all. And it was prompted by the people I work for, and as well as my colleagues who I didn't understand. I didn't understand what drove Nixon. I didn't understand what drove people to click their heels, salute, and go do what he said without even raising a question. I was not that type. That's one of the reasons I broke rank with what was going on. It just got too far out of bounds for my pleasure. I tried to get the president to protect himself, but he didn't want to hear it. So the times have changed, and what Trump has done is he's unleashed authoritarianism as being okay. Let me just footnote what I'm saying by saying I had my second book. We ran a national poll. I collaborated with the foremost authority on authoritarian personalities. I was interested in the personality side of it, not the mechanics of authoritarians. How they take over, what they do, what their various moves are. Other people had done that. What had been largely ignored for the general reader was social science that had been going on since the 1940s, where it was asked, can it happen here? And the people who asked it were interested in personalities. Would they go along and follow an authoritarian in the United States? They found largely no at that point, that these people mostly lived under rocks, and it wasn't accepted behavior. So what we found when we did the poll is about 40% of any given population has varying degrees of authoritarianism that will control and direct their life. We were stunned about 35%. We did this poll just before the most recent re-election of Trump, and we found they were Trumpers. They were MAGA. They were Make America Great Through Authoritarianism people, and it was a staggering number. That's a big part of the 77 million who voted for Trump are authoritarian personalities. Why they're doing it now and didn't do it before is Trump's made it okay to do it. He's given them permission to come out from under the rocks and indeed be who they want to be. So the United States could be changing if these people keep control of the government. The fact that we've not been here before has largely been that people were they were reluctant to come out and show who they truly were. They were a lot of Nixon's voters, I realized today after 2 decades of studying this personality, but they were also they knew it wasn't accepted behavior, if you will, so they sort of hid their authoritarianism. Today it's out and about and the norm.
I want to and we're going to continue with this particular discussion, but also I don't mind selling some books, John. So why don't you tell our viewers and listeners the names of those books?
Well, the first book I did was called Conservatives Without Conscience, and that was a play on the title of the conscience of a conservative by Senator Barry Goldwater. It was a book that sort of created his rise from a local Arizona senator to a national figure. And I have known the senator since I was 13 years old. He's passed now. His son and I, his son being a congressman from California, were roommates in prep school. So, and we used to go visit his dad. And his father obviously while I never asked him to help me get a job in Washington, ever. In fact, he told me once I did get hired and was with the House Judiciary Committee as one of the counsel, he said, "You got to promise me, John, you'll get out in 5 years." And I said, "Why, Senator?" He said, "Well," he said, "I see too many bright young guys waste their life here in the government, and you want to do public service, which I hope you will, come back in later, go out and make some money, and then come back in." So that was always my agenda. I just left sooner than I wanted, and not under all the circumstances I would have chosen. But I knew the senator from youth. He was not the man who many perceived as being some sort of wild-eyed radical. That's the way he was portrayed in the '64 election by Lyndon Johnson, that he would be throwing nuclear weapon or bombs in the men's room of the Kremlin. But rather, he was a businessman who just thought the government should not be in the business of running businesses, which is odd given, his conservatism is very different than today's conservatism, where we all, Trump wants to run the businesses and the government and all the social programs connected with it. So and it's probably out of ignorance that Trump takes these positions. Anyway, the first book was called Conservatives Without Conscience because the senator had retired, and his son, Barry Jr., and I, who talked very frequently, had said, "Listen, Dad is bored. Why don't you do a book with him?" I, at that point, I'd ghosted a couple of books for members while I was working up on Capitol Hill. And he said, why don't you do something with Dad? And because it would keep him going and give him a purpose and what have you. And the senator, Barry Jr., ran it by his dad, said, "That's a great idea." And so we started talking and trying to get a concept. And the reason he wanted to do a book was the religious right was on the rise. And he was having a public dispute with Jerry Falwell, who at that point was the leader of the religious right. And he made a statement that had gotten a lot of attention, where he publicly said Jerry Falwell should be kicked in the ass. Well, he didn't really say ass. He said kicked in the nuts, if you will. He was more direct and wanted to hurt more. He said, "John, I can't envision these preachers getting a hold of the Republican Party and what they can do to it. They think they're acting on the word of God, and they won't compromise. They are dogmatic in their beliefs, and they just won't work. Government will fail if they get a hold of the machinery." Kind of an early perception of the threat we're now facing. Anyway, he said, "I'd like to understand why." So I began digging and digging, and that's when I discovered that social science has been looking at this issue since post-World War II. Would this country do what happened under a Mussolini and a Hitler? Could that happen here? And so a group of fairly distinguished psychiatrists and psychologists and political scientists studied it for a number of years, and then that has been ongoing study. It is a wing of largely psychology now. Also, political science looks at it. Historians have looked at it. So I found all this science, and about the time I was digging it out, Barry Jr. called and said, "Listen, Dad has you missed a couple of your calls because he's a little under the weather. Why don't you just pull back on this project a little bit until he's feeling better? Uh, we had come up with the title by that time of the fact that conservatives had lost their conscience. So that's where the title evolved from,
Mhm.
uh, of conservatives without conscience, to play on the senator's words.
Right.
Well, to make that story short, the senator never really recovered, and I put the project on the shelf. And then about 10 years later, pulled it back down.
Mhm.
Uh, when I turned 65, I decided I could afford to become an author because you don't know if a book is going to sell or not. And
Sure.
who knew? I've done 14 of them, and who knew every other one would be a big New York Times bestseller success. So it's been fun as well. And I still think I have one or two left in me. I'm 87, and God willing, I can keep cranking them. Uh,
I hope so.
but anyway, that's a long story. And the one book, the other book, I'll be much briefer on.
Yeah.
Um, one of the people, one of the academics who was very helpful on conservative without conscience was a Canadian professor, but he was actually an American from St. Louis, and he'd gone to Carnegie Mellon and then gotten his PhD, and then gone up for a teaching gig in Canada and never left,
Mm.
and done a lot of research on authoritarian personalities. He was the leading social scientist in that area, uh, and creating a criteria for something that is known in social science as right-wing authoritarianism. And while he did find some left-wing authoritarians, the overwhelming bulk of them are conservatives who are authoritarian personalities. And he was very helpful. He realized I was a serious student of this after I had refreshed my memory on how statistics work, and was digging into lots of social science papers that were really highly technical and what have you, and started this email exchange that
Mm.
would go on from the mid 70s into the 80s. And then before the 2020 election, we would correspond regularly, and he suggested we do a book together. He was a more academic writer than I had learned how to write for the general audience. So I said, Bob, I had pushed him to write a layman's edition of his work, which he did and posted. But I said, we need to reach my audience. I had at that point about 300,000 readers I could count on buying my books, and that'll sell a lot of books.
Mhm.
Publishers like that. So I said, let's do a book and in collaboration. And I said, the collaboration is I'll just make sure that it's for the general reader, and you can crank out your science, and we can get your science out there in front of
Mhm.
uh, Americans, as well as I knew the head pollster at Monmouth University, which was a very sophisticated poll. They've since, with a Trump member joining their board, really pretty much shut down their polling because it was not coming out well for Trump.
Mhm.
But Patrick Murray is somebody I'd struck up a relationship with, and I said, Patrick, there's really never been a national poll of Bob Altemeyer's science. And he's done some testing down here, done a lot of Canadian testing. He's done some in foreign countries, but we want to do a poll. And so he made me an offer I thought was fair, and to do it. So we ran a national poll with Altemeyer's science as underlying the questions. And it was startling how many conservatives, which uh, initially I called without conscience, they're known as right-wing authoritarians or social dominators, with some having both sets of science developed traits. And we probably should have called them radical conservatives, because that's really what they are. Because Bob Oldemire had a large academic audience still, I kept the social science labels on them. The book did okay. As I say, I would have gone a little less scholarly, a little more general audience, but it's out there with this national poll. And I get academics who discovered the book still are contacting me and saying, "My God, they're out there." The interesting thing about authoritarians, Charles, is there are several types. The most troubling are called social dominators. The less troubling are right-wing authoritarians. Everybody has some degree of authoritarianism in them, but these are people who it drives their personality.
Where does President Trump, in your view, and based on those studies,
Well,
where
in
in the
doing
spectrum?
in doing the second book, what we want, because not people at that point didn't know what he was.
Mhm.
So the first part of that book really portrays who Donald Trump and his personality were. There was enough public material out, and just collecting it and bringing it together, we did a portrait of Trump to show that he's a poster boy for what they call the double high, the person who tests both as a right-wing authoritarian and as a social dominator. Or they're really, as I say, radical Republicans or radical conservatives. They may or may not subscribe to conservative beliefs. What they subscribe to is power. And then you add into Trump the narcissism, and that's what we've got. And it is as troubling as can be. The good news I wanted to tell you, though,
Is good news.
yes, the good news is they're the minority, these personalities. They are a distinct minority. There are more of us who are not authoritarians or any, not really, barely we show up on the charts. And there, as I say, there are more of us than there are of them. And for all these decades, we have kept them really out of power. Uh,
Until now.
until now. We've had Huey Long, we've had George Wallace, we've had they've come along. There have been varying degrees of authoritarian personalities who have stepped up on the national stage that never made it. Charles Lindbergh was his America First had a big audience, about 40% probably, and but could not get over the hurdle of the rest of us. And that's the question. Are the rest of us going to stand up and say, this is enough of Trump? This is enough authoritarianism? Or, same is true in Hungary and these other countries that have authoritarian leaders. They are a minority who has taken charge. They are the corrupt and powerful who terrify the normal people and then take control of the
Well,
government.
right, and that begs, I think, maybe a fundamental question here. Then, because it applies not only to the U.S. You mentioned Hungary, the far right movement, of course, is doing fairly well in France, to some degree, I suppose, even in the UK compared to a few years ago. So. I guess the question is, what's changed? You had mentioned that up until now, uh, that minority has been kept at bay, and the individuals who were looking to be authoritarian type leaders didn't quite get to the pinnacle of power because the checks and balances were really the majority of the population. So what has changed not only in the U.S., because I think you're absolutely right. This is not just a U.S. Phenomenon, although Trump, of course, grabs most of the headlines. This is something that's happening pretty much around the globe. Why?
Academics call it illiberalism
Oh,
or sliding democracy or democratic order, and we have slid, and along with other countries as to uh, their democratic core beliefs. The Brennan Center, who you may be familiar with, be
yeah.
someplace you should do some interviewing. They keep track of this, and we're just not where we used to be by any stretch of the imagination.
Is
Why is
but
the explanations are a little different probably in each country. Why has it happened here? Uh, it's uh, it's because I think there, some specifics and some general things that have happened. I think not teaching civics in high school, which has been true for several decades now, has resulted in virtually no understanding of the mechanics of government and the way they work. Uh, the graduating uh, high school norm is incredibly ignorant about politics and who can do what, and that the president of the United States is not the mayor. He doesn't fix potholes, although they think he should.
Mhm.
It's a lack of sophistication, and education is, I think, in the United States one of the primary reasons. As time has passed, everyone's stunned at the so-called Watergate norms that were developed post-Watergate, uh, that controlled norms being just agreed upon practices that were not reduced to laws, which I argued back some years ago. They should be laws, and then they're clear that you're violating the law rather than just violating a norm, which feels a little softer and what
Mhm.
have. But the we gradually there's been less public outcry about the violation of the norms. They grew old. People forgot them. The standards started changing. So it's been an evolution. And as I say, the Trump was a trigger to legitimize uh, a lot of this behavior. He was a public figure as a result of The Apprentice. I didn't know. I never met the man, but I sure as hell knew who he was. When he first came down the escalator to run for president, I had to do a lot of reading. And what is absolutely weird is I told my wife Maureen, I said, Mo, I said, if this man is ever elected to the presidency that he seeks, I hope somebody will keep count of the gold in Fort Knox. Well, last night she told me somebody in Congress wants them to count the gold in Fort Knox to see if it's all there. So, because he was pretty apparent very early if you took a hard look at him.
But this is why I find this whole thing so puzzling. Okay, I could understand, even if I don't necessarily agree with those who are the MAGA folks, those who voted for him and would perhaps vote for him again because he seems to think he can do this again. Um, I get that they think that he sort of hears them, he hears their problems. They think he could fix, as I think you put it before, they think that he can fix the potholes in whatever community they live in, even though, of course, that is not what a president does. I get all of that, but the uh, the apparent corruption, the transparency actually of how Mr. Trump and his family have accumulated, apparently, according to many reports, great wealth in the years that he has now been back in the White House, first the first term and in the first year of his now second term, it is so transparent. I don't understand how those people who think, yeah, this guy, he hears us, he's our champion. Why would they let him get away with doing the kinds of things as self-enrichment that I'm sure if it was somebody in their own community, they would be aghast.
Well, the short answer is they don't care.
They don't
Uh,
care.
they don't care. He's the leader of, to put it simplistically and less than fully exposed, he's the leader of the cult. And he can do no wrong in their estimation. They can forgive. Uh, what I did pull out of the book, because I thought this could come up in our conversation, uh, something that took me many, many months to do, was to
Mhm.
go through social sciences uh, portrait of the different players who become varying degrees of leadership and what have you. And the social dominators are the so-called leaders. Let me just read that the science says they got to have at least uh, three qualities or four qualities. They're typically men, but
Mhm.
they have to be dominating. They have to oppose equality. They're desirous of personal power, and they're amoral. Those are the four. Those are the four that science says that will make somebody. That is the core of being a social dominator. But look at what else they are. They're intimidating and bullying. They're faintly hedonistic. They're vengeful. They're pitiless. They're exploitive. They're manipulative. They're dishonest. They cheat to win. They're highly prejudiced. They're mean spirited. They're militant. They're nationalistic. They tell others what they want to hear. They take advantage of suckers. They specialize in creating false images of their self to sell themselves. They may or may not be religious. They're usually politically and economically conservative and Republican. Now, that was written in 1976. That's a
Mhm.
portrait of Donald Trump. The right wing followers, the people who are inclined to go along with a person like that, they're both men and women. They're called the followers. These are people who passed, and here are the essential, the three criteria that science says puts them in this category. They're submissive to authority just by their nature and personality. They're aggressive on behalf of that authority, and they're very conventional and to the core. They want things the way they think they should be. But they're also highly religious right. They're highly, excuse me, they have moderate to little education. They trust untrustworthy authorities. They're prejudiced, very prejudiced against homosexuals, women, followers of other religions, but they're also mean-spirited, they're narrow-minded, they're intolerant, they're bullying, they're zealous, they're dogmatic, they're uncritical towards their chosen authority. You say, why don't they complain about the corruption? This is
Mhm.
okay. They are hypocritical. They're inconsistent and contradictory. They're prone to panic easily. They're highly self-righteous. They're moralistic. They're strict disciplinarians. They're severely punitive. Concentration camps, those are fine with them. They demand loyalty and they return it. They have little self-awareness, and they're usually Republicans. But 2006 shows uh, I called it long before it became so prevalent as it is today. I mean, these are descriptions of the people who are running the country today.
So that raises the question that when the time comes, and it will, despite what Mr. Trump thinks, when he is out of the White House, what happens to those? I dare say it's probably not all of the 77 million who voted for him the last time around, but a sizable percentage of that is my guess, who fit those descriptions that you just read, are the kind of person that would be okay with a Donald Trump type character in power. Where do they go? Millions.
They don't go anywhere.
What do they do?
They will remain in the religious right, the Christian nationalism. They will be in things like the Tea Party, that raise hell and don't follow norms and attack a black man who becomes president in the most vicious of ways. They'll be there. The problem is the overwhelming majority of us don't think like they do, and we can take control back of the government. And that's the way it has been traditionally in the United States. So it's up to American voters who, if they don't want an authoritarian country, we won't have an authoritarian country. If they want to sit on their hands or let the other guy take care of it, we will have an authoritarian country, because they've seen now the way these people think and operate. And the question is, do they want it?
We
I
have mid
They don't.
we have midterm elections coming up here in November for Congress. Right now, the Republican Party, of course, the party that Mr. Trump, I was going to say the party that Mr. Trump belongs to, although I guess you can argue that it's not really the Republican Party anymore, right? It's Trump's whatever. But they are in control of both houses of Congress. Do you think that Mr. Trump, combined with his allies in both the House and Senate, will succeed in one way or another derailing the midterm elections so that they do not lose power?
Well, that's obviously they realize they are losing uh, some of their followers. And they're awakening those of us who are not authoritarian personalities. Those people are saying, I don't want to see uh, immigrants beaten on the streets. I don't want to see children snatched from their home or used as bait to lure people out of their home. Uh, Something that doesn't trouble the authoritarian at all. Uh, so the question is, can he corrupt the election process? It's not. I don't know the answer definitively. I do know that there are a lot of very intelligent people who are dedicated to preserving our democracy, are busy at work on this. I'm a part of a couple of groups that work on the legal side, as well as CNN. I've been with CNN for 8 years until recently, and after as the evolution of CNN to both sidism has changed, the producer used me much and much less because they knew where I was coming from. It's not that I'm anti-Trump; it's I'm anti-authoritarianism.
You had mentioned at the very beginning that if you go back to the Watergate years, you blew the whistle on Richard Nixon. Why isn't there somebody in the White House? Why isn't there a John Dean in the White House now? I know in the first term for Mr. Trump, there were, if not quite John Dean's, people who certainly said to him, "No, Mr. President, you cannot do this, or you can't do that." Um, but no one apparently now.
Well, I don't know. There may be. It's still early. It's the first year has just passed of the second term. Um, I was in essence forced to do what I did, and I knew it would be rough to do it. In fact, I lived in the witness protection program for 18 months, in and out of it, because it is physically threatening to do what I did. Um, I was I suspected I could cost Nixon his presidency, but I wanted to end what I was totally unacceptable behavior, and I was surprised. I'm re-looking at Nixon because I think Nixon's motives are so much different than Trump's. I never thought Nixon's motives were bad. I think that he somewhere along the line told his mother, a good Quaker who he loved and really wanted to please, that he would do everything he could by joining the government, by going in the military as a Quaker, that he would do everything to help find peace in the world. And that was really his agenda. He didn't care much about domestic politics and really let his aides handle that much more than foreign affairs, where he had a strong hand because he knew the world. He knew the world as well as his family. He knew leaders from his days as vice president. And I think that was his driving force. And he believed that sometimes you had to abuse power to deal with the rest of the world, who were not the nicest people always. And so I think there probably will, as a result of Trump, be a total reexamination of Richard Nixon. And when you not there's not been much done on his motives. It's primarily been on his abuses. But when I begin to look at what was driving those abuses, they were very often connected with national security. And national security was his forte. And he was trained in the world, if you will, by Dwight Eisenhower. When he became acting president, he was very close to Eisenhower and stayed in touch with him. But as Eisenhower's vice president, they became very, very close. It was sort of a father-son relationship. Well, the image of Eisenhower is sort of avuncular, where he's just this wonderful smile and gentle man. But think about it. You couldn't have run D-Day, where you knew hundreds of thousands of Americans were going to die, if you were some kind of wallflower. Eisenhower was a tough, tough cookie. And I think Nixon thought you had to be a tough, tough cookie to get peace in the world. So where does Trump fit in this? He doesn't. He doesn't have the intellect. He doesn't have the experience and understanding of institutions. He doesn't have the respect for institutions where you can use them effectively, whereas Nixon did. So as I say, I think we're seeing very different potential for looking at Richard Nixon.
I asked at the beginning of the podcast, what did you think, or what would you think Nixon would think of Donald Trump? So let me ask it the other way around. Do you think that Donald Trump would think that Nixon was kind of a wimp for resigning, that he should have just hung in there? You do.
Said that. Albert said that he liked Nixon. Nixon had a friendship. The letters that have exchanged between them are just very surface. But Nixon liked Trump because he had a football team, and Nixon thought he was really an expert on calling plays in football games. So he would send suggested plays to Trump, and Trump would pass them on to the coach. And so some of Nixon's football strategizing would work its way into Trump's New Jersey Generals, as I believe they were called.
Yeah.
I think that Trump has said publicly that he doesn't understand why Nixon resigned, and he wouldn't get it. These authoritarians, particularly the double highs, the dominators, they don't know shame. They are shameless. You can't embarrass Donald Trump. You can't embarrass any of them because they're just not built that way. And the reason that I focus so much on personality is I think it drives us all and it drives politics in general. And there's so much science out there on it that I complain to my social scientist friends all the time. Why don't you start talking about these things and sharing them and writing publicly or going on more television programs? And they just don't want to because it's frightening. They know what, they don't want, they're not the type, they're not built to go to battle, another problem.
Hopeful or not?
Am I hopeful or not? I am. I think that the institutions can hold. The courts are holding. Even Trump appointed judges are ruling against him. There are literally. I was following 300 cases up until a couple of weeks ago, and he's losing in court. Uh, so that's the first good thing. Secondly, the American people have finally realized who this guy is, and they're taking to the streets in 40-degree weather, like you're familiar with, in Idaho, where you visit. But anyway,
No, North Dakota, but close enough.
North Dakota, okay, it is close enough. But I think the people they just don't want to tolerate this. And they're going to discover that it's very hard to be a authoritarian dictator when unless you have a passive audience, or the rest of your group is so ruthless that they can put those who do speak out of business. We haven't reached that point yet. Nobody's knocked on my door, not that they might not, but that's the risk. But so more and more people are speaking out. More and more people are protesting. So combined with the institutions that are working, a big test is, for example, the Supreme Court. It couldn't be clearer in my mind, and everything I studied for all these years, that the president doesn't have the power to tax the American people. He cannot do tariffs. He cannot write taxes. This is an exclusive congressional power. And it's a very thin margin that the speaker is able to hold together the Republican caucus. And it broke the other day on the Epstein affair. I think that horrific scandal that is being buried could send authoritarianism to hell and back, and it would take a long time to come back, though.
I was wondering if we would get through much time before Jeffrey Epstein's name would come up.
We probably could have made it the distance if you'd have said that. But anyway, he is, that's that. It's remarkable how blatant the cover-up is. The Watergate cover-up, which ran for 900 some days, was really in the dark. I mean, people didn't know about it. But for Nixon's tapes, we never would have known and understood it fully. I did a book called The Nixon Defense, which took me 5 years to do because I transcribed all of Nixon's Watergate conversations. I had a team of grad students. Fortunately, I had the lead one was a woman getting her PhD in archival science, and she'd been a legal secretary, and she sort of took charge of the transcription. I discovered very early it was easier for me to listen than to sit at the keyboard myself, although I did ruin my hearing doing the book because I put earphones. I did everything I could to listen to. Some of the conversations are very difficult to hear. The conversations recorded in his executive office building office. The microphones were always hidden in the desk. Nobody sat around the desk in the around the Oval Office. Yes, I have 37 conversations and I'm glad I do. Virtually all my other ones, some of them disappeared.
Let me interrupt because a thought comes to mind, and that is I've heard people say, gee, I wonder if like Nixon, who had those secret recordings, which really did do him in. If Donald Trump does that, and my thinking is he doesn't need to make secret recordings. He says everything on television.
He is, by personality and the training of Roy Cohn, explains everything he's going to do before he does it. That
We
takes
should
the
we should say for people who may not know, Roy Cohn was a famous, infamous, however you want to look at it, attorney who was for a good portion of time Donald Trump's lawyer. This is way before Donald Trump was in politics, but Roy Cohn was known for his ruthlessness. I think that's a pretty accurate description
yeah,
as an attorney. So sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to get.
also a poster boy authoritarian personality,
Yeah.
very much so. And authoritarians like each other. They respect each other, particularly the meaner they are, the more of these traits they have. They understand each other. And Trump got it. If you say you're going to do it, no one's going to think you're acting in secret. And that's why, I'm surprised that they're not handling the cover up of Epstein with a little bit more finesse than they are. But it is just blatant now what they're doing. And, Pam Bondi is willing to play. Todd Blanche is willing to play because they'll lose now. They've bought into it, so they own it.
What do you think they're covering up, though?
A horrific child sex trafficking activity that involves people that the people that are otherwise once considered respectable. And people are, as you know, as their name is even surfacing where there's no indication they did anything wrong, just the association
Yeah.
with Epstein is resulting in their resignations now. They just can't even be, he is, he is so toxic, he is so radioactive that they're, as their names are surfacing. And I think the Congress will, if not this Congress, the next one will get down into those papers, and it's going to be even worse for Trump. This is, in a sense, it's like Watergate, and it's difficult to go away. It was ignored for a long time during the totality of the Biden administration. They just, not for partisan reasons, they just had other things they wanted to do rather than pursue, what could have been a whole explanation. And anyway, they made lots of mistakes with Trump and how the threat he really was. And they could have prosecuted him as well, and he could be serving time right now for Espionage Act violations, as well as a lot of fraud cases that he's carrying the guilt charge on 34, is it, felonies for fraud in New York.
In New York, yeah.
So, but no one really has ever believed he would make it, and he's got some smart people with him now. People who realized he just might make it, and the Heritage Foundation put together that Project 2025, which is a horrific conservative, radical conservative document. They just, again, very open what they're going to do. They said they were going to do it in 180 days. They're getting close to that now. And why 180 days? Well, now they can maybe mend a few things and get reelected, and maybe not have a total drubbing at the midterms. So that's
John,
the right now.
John Dean, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us on the podcast. It was a very interesting conversation. I enjoyed it. I hope you did as well. And I hope to have you back at another time on the podcast. That does it for this episode of SOS America. For those of you who would like to subscribe, it is free, so we always encourage you to do that. Any comments, of course, are more than welcome. So until the next edition of SOS America, I'm Charles Feldman. Thank you.